Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of Chatting Cinema. Happy to be back here. Today we're going to be talking Martin Scorsese's comments about cinema and Marvel movies, coming of age films, and things we've seen recently. So I'm Gianni,
I'm Flynn, and this is our friend Alex.
Hi, yep, that's me.
and yeah, let's get right into it. So Martin Scorsese originally said, before writing an op-ed in the New York Times, that Marvel films are not cinema. And when he explained this, he said that cinema is an art form, right? And it brings you the unexpected. And he doesn't believe that in superhero movies this happens. What are our thoughts?
Yeah, he compared them to theme parks, and I think that that was sort of his way of softening the edge of what he was saying, because he tried to lean into the idea that theme parks are fun and theme
Right.
parks are fine, and that's good. But a lot of people took offense to this because for now a whole generation of people since 2008, because a lot of people took his comments to be about the MCU, because he specified Marvel, not superheroes in general. So a whole generation has grown up with these movies being their movies and the movies that get them out to movie theaters and things like that. I will say, I think that both sides of this argument have a point, and that both sides of this argument have gone way too far defending that point.
Yeah.
So in terms of Marvel movies, as far as I'm concerned, of course they're cinema. I mean, they're movies. They're shown in a movie theater. Audiences watch them. Audiences enjoy them. Audiences get emotional reactions from them, and run the gamut of emotional reactions, whether that be sadness, happiness, whether they're laughing, crying. People get things out of Marvel movies. They most definitely evoke emotional responses. But for the Scorsese side, I feel like his comments, I think that the point was lost a little bit. And I think that he's really like trying to get into the fact that independent cinema, when this type of movie dominates the movie theater screens, sort of takes a back seat and might not. For example, if Avengers Endgame was out and taking up 7 screens in a 15 auditorium movie theater, well, that's only 8 screens that can go to other movies. And when you consider other franchise movies, other more expensive movies, then how does a film like The Lighthouse get in there? How does a film like Parasite get in there? So his point is a salient one, and it's that these independent movies, while they don't have the massive budgets or audiences that Marvel movies do, still deserve to be seen by an audience in a movie theater on a big screen. But both sides have sort of like, the pro Marvel side has kind of tried to discount Scorsese's opinions, and when Martin Scorsese talks about movies, you listen. Like, he doesn't have to like Marvel movies for you to keep liking Marvel movies. Like, he doesn't have to have enjoyed Endgame for you to cry at the ending. Like, those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. So for people to say, like, he doesn't know what he's talking about, this and that, I think that that's inherently silly. But for the other side of the argument, for people to sort of co-opt these comments and be like, of course Marvel movies aren't cinema and you're dumb if you like them, I think that's ridiculous too. Like what you like, don't like what you don't like. Not everybody has to like the same things. That's what makes movies so great. That's what keeps us getting different movies. So that's just kind of my like initial thoughts about this.
Yeah, I mean, and from my point of view, I do think to a certain extent, especially after clarifying the statements, I think Scorsese is right in the way that Marvel movies shouldn't dominate cinema screens, right? We should make room for other independent filmmakers to have their voices and their films seen and heard, right? And I mean, that's where I come out on it. I do think that he is right in that regard. But on the flip side, yeah, I get so invested in Marvel films. I'm so attached to those characters, and I have been. I grew up with those movies. We all did. So I love them, you know. But I do agree that they shouldn't dominate movie theaters.
So, the way I took his comments more so was on the basis of comparison to other films, like how some films are like aesthetic choices, some films are mainly character-driven plots. and that Marvel films, like when I sit down to the movies and I compare, I guess an example would be later on Grand Budapest Hotel. I'll talk about a little bit. When I sit down and they're like, compare Grand Budapest Hotel to Iron Man 3, which, is probably not the best Marvel movie to bring out.
Hey.
But
Yeah.
when I'm asked to compare, I can't. They're totally different
Yeah.
genres. That like, does it make the Marvel movie less cinema and more something else? I don't think so. But at the same time, I can't put those in the same like realm of thought.
Right.
I guess is my thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I think it's a good way of looking at it. But I also think, and this is something that Scorsese sort of mentioned because he keeps getting hounded to continuously clarify these comments, and I don't think anybody should ask Scorsese about this anymore. I don't think people should be going out and asking Francis Ford Coppola about it like people have done, and I don't think that Kevin Feige or Bob Iger or James Gunn have to get interviewed about it either, because then it's just going to be like a cannibalization of the news cycle. Like, we don't need to keep talking about this over and over again, and we don't have to, like, all of these people that I've just mentioned have so much more interesting things to say about movies and filmmaking, and so ask them about that
Right.
instead of this for now. But something that Scorsese has pointed out is that there's a lot of talented people behind these Marvel movies, and whether that be behind the camera, in front of the camera, writing the scripts, whatever. And I do think to an extent they're putting out these movies that are really solid and have a really good grasp of the stories that they're trying to tell. And just for the MCU's sake, what they've done in terms of long-form storytelling over multiple franchises that sort of span different genres and have all these different characters and have them coexist in this universe is really impressive, and it's something that we haven't seen. And we can argue the merits of that because now everybody wants to make a cinematic universe, and most people have not had the success level that Marvel has. And that's another thing about Scorsese's comments, that I think he kind of sees that landscape and is like, okay, yeah, Disney's doing it and they're making all the money, that's fine, but then Universal tries the dark universe and they have all these cool properties with the Universal monsters, right? But because they were trying to replicate this theme park, they failed right out of the gate. And then it's done, and now you have to wait years to get another Universal monster movie. Or, we can talk about the DC movies who have tried to establish that universe, when now with movies like Joker coming out, now they're making content that people really like by straying away from that formula. So I think that Scorsese's also looking at that as, how many movies from these studios and original ideas have we missed out on from them trying to sort of build this grand universe instead of starting slow.
Yeah. That makes me think of another thing, which is that Disney Plus comes out tomorrow, and we're going to see Marvel shows come to that streaming service. And Kevin Feige said that you'll have to watch these shows if you want to continue understanding the MCU as a whole. So do you think that's going to take away from the quality of that long-form storytelling and of those coherent stories, that we have to watch it on this streaming service, that we have to watch a show in addition to the film? Do you think the films won't stand on their own? I mean,
personally, I think that's just like, it's a very Disney move.
Yeah.
But honestly, like, supplementary material is just the way it is now. Like, you're always going to be, like, I think there's very few genres anymore where you can just watch something and it is what it is. Right. You're always going to have material from the outside coming in that just, it's adding to the quality, but it's also, he's saying, from what it sounds like, that it's completely necessary. Like, if you go into a movie, like, you might not know a character coming into it, which is a little crazy, I think, just from, like, again, like a medium perspective. Merging television and film usually doesn't happen unless it's like a completely rebooted series or something like that. So I want to see how that translates in the future.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that for me, I have to take a wait and see approach to it, as far as Kevin Feige's saying this, but I mean, his job first and foremost is to promote this brand. Yeah. So is he saying that to make sure that interest in these shows is sustained, or how necessary is it, right? is this just going to be like, oh, well, I watched WandaVision and now I get this reference in Doctor Strange 2? Or is it like, no, the plot of WandaVision is the pre-plot to Doctor Strange 2, and you need to know everything that happened in order to fully understand anything that's going on in the movie? I can't imagine that that's what they're going to do. It seems like way too big a risk for these big tentpole movies to rely on audiences watching. If we're saying that the series are going to be like 6 to 8 episodes, that's 6 to 8 hours of extra material. I don't think they're going to bet on that. But I will say, I think that if they find an approach works where it's only a little bit from the shows, and then people are watching the shows and then watching the movies, and that works, I could see them keep expanding upon that and making more and more of the plot relevant to the television shows to keep everybody watching everything.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, I only ask that because that seems to be the discourse on Twitter right now, is that, are these shows going to be that necessary?
Right.
And to me, I agree. I don't think Kevin Feige would take that big of a risk, Disney, Marvel, the whole company, because you look at movies like Endgame, and my parents certainly haven't seen every movie in the MCU, but when they watch Endgame, they can still follow it, and it still stands on its own. Maybe some of the more emotional beats don't hit, maybe some of the references go over their heads, but they still follow the movie,
right.
So I do think that that'll continue despite having these new shows on Disney Plus.
And like checking Marvel's case history with the Netflix shows and all that, like just going off what we know, I mean, all those shows are really, I think they're pretty good at standalone, excluding Iron Fist. But, like, those all provide great material for the movies. Like, I never would have understood Coulson as well as I did without Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but at the same time, it really didn't impact how I watched Avengers or how I watched any of the following films.
It's funny that you mention that, because I haven't seen an episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
It's worth checking out. It does provide, like, if you like the Marvel Universe but don't like superpowers.
Right.
Just the kind of like what normal people do to kind of catch up with the heroes. I enjoyed it very much.
Yeah. Well, I think that wraps up our Martin Scorsese segment, and let's move on into coming-of-age films. I think these are films probably that we've all related to, and some that come to mind. I know, Alex, you mentioned off-camera Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Yeah, the animated film from 2018. An excellent film in its own right, but I also felt it had a very unique story to tell about maybe like a superhero who, like a lot of times, again, jumping back into superheroes immediately, it's all these people who just become ultra powerful and they're just amazing right off the bat.
Right, good from the jump, yeah.
So, but this is a real story about someone who doesn't really want their powers, and kind of it goes along with their growth to grow into the responsible position they need to be in.
Right.
Which I think is like indicative of coming of age movies even without superpowers.
Yeah.
That's another facet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's something that Spider-Verse does really well, and honestly the Harry Potter franchise, it's so interesting to view movies like that, like a superhero movie or a fantasy world like Harry Potter, because a lot of times when you're a kid in these situations, like growing up and dealing with these things does feel like that gargantuan of a task. Like, your math test does feel like destroying a super collider to save the multiverse, or like talking to somebody you might have a crush on feels like fighting against the Hungarian horntail. So I think that the way those stories are told are really interesting in that, these things feel like otherworldly until you look back on them and you're like, that wasn't that big a deal. But in the moment, when you're watching these as a kid, you completely relate, because you're like, yeah, I'm not fighting against a super collider, but I feel exactly what Miles is feeling in that moment.
Yeah, I think we really relate to the characters of those films and of those TV shows like Stranger Things. Mm-hmm. We've all had that friend group, I think, of where you're on your bikes, you're out there, or you're just playing games in someone's basement. And we kind of feel that familial connection with just our friends as we're growing up.
Right.
I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, and that's something, Stranger Things or it, dealing with these traumas and these like monsters that really can just be stand-ins for adolescence.
Yeah.
and going off on that, like just going into more like realistic coming of age stories, like there's Eighth Grade last year, there's Booksmart this year, or Euphoria on HBO. I think that a lot of artists that are making these types of coming of age projects now really understand what like young film fans went through growing up, and they're such realistic. Even Spider-Man: Homecoming are such realistic depictions of what it's like to be a kid, like right now or just a couple years ago. And I think it's really fascinating to watch that progression of directors and writers who like really get it, putting out art like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's great that you mentioned Eighth Grade and Booksmart and some of these more mature films, because that's it, that's what it's like. And it's kind of scary, but yeah, I think they're really important that we have coming of age films. Do you guys have a favorite? I think if I had to pick, I would go with the Way, Way Back. That was kind of a star-studded cast. Steve Carell, kind of one of his first delves into drama, I think. Toni Collette is in that film. She's great. Hereditary, Knives Out. And I think that, to me, was kind of the first coming-of-age movie that I saw. Oh, Sam Rockwell, by the way, is in it. I think this is the first one I saw where I was like, I could have been that kid, or that kid is me, or was me. And I think that's kind of the catalyst of coming-of-age films, is when you can relate to any of the characters in that movie, I think about The Fault in Our Stars, too. Not that I can relate to that story of having cancer, which is unfortunate, but I think it's just, like I said, it's those connections, I think, and those relationships that are depicted on screen. When they're done well, when they're written well, we can all relate. And I think that's what keeps people coming to the theater for them,
To bring out like a crazy example, I really, really enjoyed. I guess could you call Scott Pilgrim versus the Universe?
Absolutely, yeah.
Coming of age film, and that really dives into relationships and coming out of bad relationships and what's going on there. And I thought, as a younger person, I really identified with that. In video games, which sometimes felt like they entered the real world, they permeated my life so much. So it was just really interesting to see that kind of come to fruition.
Yeah, that's an excellent example. I don't know if I could pick a favorite. I mean, I really identify with Peter's journey in Spider-Man: Homecoming, and that movie's always sort of spoken to me as somebody who has really related to Spider-Man and Peter Parker as a character since being 5 years old. Like, Homecoming to me really knocked it out of the park, and Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. I would say that whole, like, the three middle films of Prisoner of Azkaban, Goblet of Fire, and Order of the Phoenix have such an interesting arc of youth and youthfulness and youthful innocence that sort of, I mean, the whole Harry Potter series kind of hits a fever pitch when Cedric Diggory dies in Goblet of Fire. I don't think that's too big a spoiler to bring up. I'm sorry to all my Hufflepuffs. But so Cedric Diggory dying in that graveyard is the death of Harry's youth. And sort of he's been in this dangerous world for the past now 4 movies at Goblet of Fire and 4 books. But this is the first time he kind of realizes, like, a kid my age was just murdered in a graveyard and the world does not stop. Like, everything keeps going. You do not get a moment to breathe after Cedric Diggory is killed. It's kill the spare, Wormtail kills him, done, we're moving on. And you see the fallout of that when Harry makes it back to Hogwarts. And then Order of the Phoenix is so interesting because it's all this adolescent, like, teenage rage that Harry is feeling constantly, and feelings of isolation, and he's so alone. And so I think that is, aside from the world that J.K. Rowling built and how lived in and real it feels, things like that are what keeps a franchise like that alive long after it's done, because people really identify with that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that also going back into Spider-Man: Homecoming, even Far From Home, I think builds on that. We mentioned earlier how sometimes circumstances are thrust upon you that you don't want to deal with, right? Similar to Spider-Verse. Miles gets his powers, and he doesn't necessarily want them. I think Peter is really feeling the pressure in Far From Home of who is the next Tony Stark, who is the next Avenger, the leader of the Avengers. And I think he doesn't want it, right? He tries to give the glasses to Mysterio. It's definitely interesting to see how that all happens and how Peter is growing in the MCU right now. Yeah.
And then, like, a real success of these companies, specifically talking about the Harry Potter franchise and I guess the Spider-Man franchise, is targeting that demographic and then having you grow up with the characters. Like Harry Potter, one of the reasons I think it was so successful was because the characters were the same age as the people watching it, and then you literally grew up with them. Like you watch the actors get older, you watch the characters in the films get older, and then just by the end of it, you guys ended up in this place where everyone kind of felt the same thing.
Right.
And it was like the characters kind of jumped into reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, we could do a whole number of episodes on Harry Potter, but the credit to casting, to find these kids who are kids, like you're saying, and have them grow into the roles and grow into the people that they needed to be is just, you know, I don't know if that'll ever be done again with that level of success, that collection of talent for all these kids to grow into something this special, and for you to be able to grow into a franchise like this is just an amazing accomplishment in cinema.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess that's good for coming of age films. What have you guys seen recently that you'd like to talk about?
I'll go first. I recently saw Parasite, Bong Joon-ho's movie from this year. It's a South Korean film, and a lot of people were buzzing about it, you know, as maybe one of the best movies of the year. Bong Joon-ho did Snowpiercer. He's a great director. And this movie, you know, 3-word review is believe the hype. If you've heard about the hype, it's real. It's very good, and sort of like runs the gamut of emotions and feelings that you experience as a viewer of this movie. One critic said that roughly that it starts as one thing and turns into something completely different. And I'm not going to get into plot details because I'd like for people to see this movie and I don't want to spoil anything. But I think that is certainly true of this movie. You go in sort of expecting one thing and then you're getting it for a while. And then it transforms into not another story entirely, but a story told in a very different way. And it's very interesting to watch it all unfold. There's moments of levity. There's incredibly tense moments. Some parts make for a very stressful viewing experience. But I think all of that is in the name of a director that's being really effective at what he's making. So I would recommend going to see Parasite.
I've recently been watching Living with Yourself on Netflix, starring Paul Rudd, and this show is just bonkers. Like, I remember the first trailer when it came out, and I thought the premise was really cool. That like he clones himself, and this clone of him is better than him in every way. Right? He's smarter. He's funny. He does better at work. Things like that. His hair is slicked back. You know, so it's the idea of what if there was a better version of you out there, or that you could make, right? But anyway, this isn't a spoiler for the show, but in the first episode, when Paul Rudd goes through this cloning process, you're supposed to die. After your clone is born, you're supposed to be killed. And then your clone just takes your place in society, right? But that doesn't happen. So now we have the show play out where it's Paul Rudd, and one's better and one's worse. And I think it's such an interesting premise so far. I'm on episode 5, so I'm still watching, but I really like it.
And then I'll add to that before I talk about my thing, but I think the theme of the show really is, and this isn't a spoiler, I promise, is being better really better.
Yeah.
Like for you and your place in society. Like our faults, what makes us a person, and does that make us any less human if we're perfect? And I think that's a really interesting to take on cloning in a comedic sense, because it's Paul Rudd, and I think he's hilarious. He's one of my favorite actors. So what I saw recently, I rewatched, I want to bring it up because I love it so much, Grand Budapest Hotel. I saw it for the first time in years. And that's it's a movie about, I guess I would say, like, the death of a time period. Like, it talks about war, and there's no quite clear, like, sides to the war. Right. And it's about this beautiful hotel that's kind of preserving an old European sense and it's about how that's lost, and the people are kind of there's no place for them in society anymore but this hotel. And that's like a very meta view of the film, because it's a comedy and a kind of a I wouldn't call it a coming of age, but what would you call it? Like a drama?
Yeah.
So, but that's worth checking out. You can check it out anywhere nowadays. And then the other one I wanted, is it okay if I bring up too?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an anime film I saw for the first time in a special preview, I guess, at the Regal. And it's called Your Name.
Okay.
And it's about, it's a boy meets girl story, but the thing is there's like time travel weird stuff, like the girl passed away in an explosion, like a bomb explosion, like 100 years ago, and some time paradox allows her to meet the boy, and it's about their journey of trying to remember each other, even though they've never really met because of this time issue. It's worth checking out. It's the only film I've ever cried at.
Really?
Wow.
The only film. Yeah,
Wow.
it's really emotional, and at the end, when the finale culminates, you really feel for the characters and what happens, and it's amazing.
Right. Yeah, and I just want to touch on Parasite, because I recognize that I recommended it without really talking about what it's about. So Parasite, at its heart, is about class struggle and inequality, told in a very fascinating way. And I'll say it's a South Korean film, and the dialogue is all Korean. So you more than likely have to watch it with subtitles. But the themes are so universal that doesn't matter. The way the story's told visually, you get it. So if you're interested in income inequality and class struggle and where certain people fit in the world, I would definitely recommend that. And Grand Budapest Hotel is so good.
Yeah.
If you've seen anything Wes Anderson, if you've seen The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou or The Royal Tenenbaums, and for some reason you missed this one, you have to check it out, because Grand Budapest Hotel is so great.
Well, like bringing it back to both our previous conversations, Martin Scorsese, one of the things he said was aesthetic makes like cinema in the op-ed we read. So Wes Anderson has aesthetic down.
Yeah.
I can't say anything on that. His films really grab a time period, and then Moonrise Kingdom is such a coming of age film. I think that I can't believe I didn't bring it up when we were talking about it.
Wes Anderson, styles for miles.
Yeah. So a lot of good stuff. I mean, I was just thinking about the coming of age films that we didn't talk about. I mean, Lady Bird we didn't mention.
Yeah, I can't believe I didn't mention Lady Bird.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Greta.
Yeah, can't wait for Little Women this
Yeah.
year. But there's just so much out there to see. But that wraps it up for today, episode 5 of Chatting Cinema. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Alex, for being here. Come back anytime. Yeah. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah, and thank you to SSTV, as always, for allowing us to use the equipment in the studio. It's greatly appreciated. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next time.